6:30, 6:35.
Oh.
We're ready to get started.
Hey Rob, just FYI, anyone who wants to talk, make sure to turn on your microphone while you're talking and then turn it off when you're not, so it can be picked up on the video.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, call to order, ready to start. Start with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good, how are you?
All right. Just did the call to order, the approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the regular meeting minutes for May 26, 2020?
Motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from May 26, 2020. as
Second.
submitted.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The executive session, May 26, 2020, has everyone had a chance to review?
Motion to approve the executive session minutes from May 26, 2020 as submitted.
Give it a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next on the list is the chairman's report. Nothing really to report other than we have a few properties that are now currently under contract. We'll go into more detail in the executive session, but those are moving forward. Number 4, the financial report.
All right, if I could draw your attention to the financial half of the agenda for tonight. I want to say thank you to Catherine for working with me and our accountant to help get a lot more information about where our accounts are and how we're spending our money. Really, the first page is probably the most critical part of it. It shows that our total bank accounts are $490,000, $490,905. If you look at the following page, you can see where we're at relative to our budget. So I'll leave you with that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
On the page that's titled Budget versus Actuals, FY20 P&L,
Yes.
just want to make sure I understand. The first line says intergovernmental revenue, 23,000, budget 20,000. This is the money that the city is giving us to cover the debt service that we don't have enough revenue for.
That's correct.
So we've only taken 23,000 from the city.
They're paying us quarterly, which is why, as of now, they've only paid the first quarter.
And for the whole year, they're only giving us $80,000.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I will turn it back over to the chair then.
Number 5, the DDA property update. I guess I jumped ahead a little there. A little more detail. We have 5 properties in the town center area or in the DDA area. We're still working through the MOU on the town center. The collision site is now currently under contract, as is the tables and chairs building. Both of those we hope to close before the end of the year. Obviously, we're pushing to do that much sooner. But, thank you to both parties involved. We look forward to seeing what happens here. The 4th property would be the Women's Center, Ron Mullis's project, which I think was moved to close in August.
August 2nd or 4th?
That sounds right. So they exercised their second option, is that right?
Correct.
And they need to close in August.
And they paid the additional $5,000.
That's right. And the 5th property, we are not currently marketing or selling at the moment. But that is the DDA property update.
Hey, Rob, I also asked if Randy could come up just to give a little bit more specifics on the tables and chairs update.
Sure.
Would you mind?
Yep.
To tell us about the due diligence?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Hello? Oh. Is this on now? Great. Do I have to hold it down?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, a couple things. I guess one other milestone piece of good news. In fact, a week ago tonight, we received the final zoning on the town center site. The last piece of the puzzle was the multifamily, and that passed last Tuesday. So that's good news. And as Rob mentioned, next step is to now work through the MOU and keep that moving. As it relates to the other two properties, we are indeed under contract with the tables and chairs project. I guess we went under contract, it'll be 3 weeks ago this Thursday. And we've already completed our survey, our title work, just got our phase 1 environmental report back late last week. All checked out good. And so far so good. And continuing our design work on that as well as the work with our investors. But that is on track. Our goal on that site is to file for zoning in the July zoning cycle, which is the July 30 timetable, which would have us then heard in mid-September. So that's the target. We'll see. We've got a lot of moving pieces to get between now and then. As it relates to the collision site, Darren couldn't make it tonight, but he is also under contract. I think we went under contract the same day. And he's doing similarly. He's going through his process. The one piece of the puzzle, his is a land assemblage. He had a meeting this morning with Larry Pierce, and Don was a part of that as well. And that is looking good. They did discover another small piece of land that is necessary for his his project, owned by Charlie Hendon. It's a very tiny sliver. And Mr. Pierce apparently has some good history on that. So apparently they had a productive conversation on that today. And Darren's going to be in the process of adding that to round out his site. But he's working through his site planning process. He may be a month behind us on his zoning, just a bigger project, but he also has the same timeline in his contract to close by the year end and hopefully sooner than that. So those are the updates.
The only additional thing that the DDA needs to work out is a parking.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Exactly, yeah. And that was part of our contract on, we'll go ahead and at least raise the issue here. So on tables and chairs, currently for converting that to an office building, it's about 35 spaces short. And we knew that going into it. And part of our provision of our contract is to negotiate a parking agreement with the city. And our thought is to lease spaces on the Vintage Pizza site where Ed Boyles is leasing their spaces right now. We don't need all the spaces that Ed Boyles has, and they also rent a warehouse. We don't need that either, but we do need about 35 spaces. And so that is something that we want to work through, at least get the business terms squared away during our due diligence period, and then sign that upon closing. I will say from a kind of, we're going down a couple different paths, because we need to be able to convince a lender and a potential tenant that we can give them ample parking spaces. And so, you know, step one is to work out a deal with the city, but from a longer term perspective, if indeed Darren moves forward with his project or the Stein Atlantic Realty, we've been in touch with both of them about potentially buying spaces or leasing spaces in their deck. The only challenge is those projects are not capitalized yet, they haven't started yet, and so we need, in order for us to keep moving, we need to get an agreement in place that if we find another alternative, great, but at least we need to have a plan, and thankfully the Vintage Pizza site is right across the street from us, so that could work. So.
I've got two questions, if you have a minute.
Yeah.
The first is just to confirm the parking requirement. Is that a municipal requirement or is that a lender requirement?
It's a leasing requirement, which then in turn becomes a lender requirement. As we read the PUD, there's actually not a parking stated minimum that you need, but it's just from a market standpoint, from what we've tracked, as well as we track the competitive properties in the market.
What's your on-site parking ratio right now with your site plan?
On-site, and we're getting our revised site plan probably next week, Rob, but we're at 2.5 per thousand with an add-on factor of about 15%. So it's a little bit less than pure count. So we want to be able to solve for 3.5, 3.5-ish. So hence the 35 spaces.
So the next question that I would have is how long of a lease are you proposing for parking on the Vintage site?
Yeah, so what we've proposed is I sent some bullet points to Rob and Catherine late last week. So here's our thought. So the plan will be a 5-year lease with 3 5-year renewal options. But it could be terminable by the city if you guys go to sell the land. We don't want to encumber your land. What we would ask for, though, and I know the devil will be in the details on this, is a right to negotiate with the buyer or the developer of the Vintage site to buy or lease spaces in that deck, the to-be-built deck. And then the other piece of the puzzle is if we can find an alternative solution down the road once Darren's project or the Stein project is up and running, then we can terminate the lease. But that's the proposed terms.
Okay, that answers my question.
And I have a question. So how does that affect Vintage Pizza?
Doesn't affect it at all, because the way it works is Vintage has all this stuff up on Peachtree.
Right.
And so all we're talking about is the spaces that are on American
Okay,
Industrial.
excellent. Thank you.
I haven't been over there since COVID started, but if I remember right, the recall warehouse next to it, he put up a barrier blocking entrance from his property. So I think that probably if you do lease that from us, someone's going to have to make some kind of entrance on American Industrial, because I don't believe there's currently a defined entrance.
You're totally right, Ben. And so the good news is we've worked with Catherine already. She's talked with the city engineers, and they said that we can get a curb cut as long as we put it immediately kind of next to where the warehouse is, just to give you enough distance from the traffic light at Chamblee Dunwoody. So it's doable. I mean, you can get there now. You'd have to wind around the building from Peachtree, but yeah, having a curb cut there is key. So we picked up on that pretty early on. So I'm not sure how long he's had that fence up, but it's definitely there.
Who would carry the costs of that curb cut and the engineering associated?
I think we can handle that as part of our construction. And that's the other thing, I think, and this is getting into the weeds, but as we've talked with Rob, so, you guys have a 60-day termination right now, notice with Ed Boyles. We're not going to need that space until we finish, which is, call it third quarter, fourth quarter next year. So there's, you guys can continue to lease that to those guys until we get closer to when we need it, and then we'll put it in that deck, or
So-
that curb cut.
So is there any chance, how are you looking to structure the permission to do the curb cut? I would like to see that be not permanent,
Yeah.
just in case.
No, I get it. Whatever the city engineers would accept, the
Yeah.
most minimal work at all, possible, for sure.
Okay, all right.
I'm on board with that, as long as it's something that could, cars can get through safely.
And the idea is that this is temporary until you get sites other places.
That's the hope, yeah. I mean, again, and particularly in today's world, you never know if these things happen until they happen. So we just have to be able, we're gonna be through our due diligence, in a few weeks and just want to have a plan in place, so.
Leslie, that would also probably change if we ever were able to acquire the warehouse.
Well, that's true.
Right, yeah.
That's definitely true.
And that's why I would like to be very sure that it's not a permanent right.
Right, no, again, if you guys go to sell that land, again, all we want is the ability to talk with whoever's buying it or developing it to try to work out a deal. Because otherwise, we can't look, no tenant is going to sign a long-term lease if they don't know they have spaces, so. Okay, any other questions?
Great, thank you. Moving on to old business, starting with Peachtree Station, Seraphim. I'll take that. We were so busy negotiating the 2 PSAs that this got pushed to the side a little bit, but I need to send around Seraphim's valuation to the group. We need to come up with any sort of questions that we have on the process of the valuation, how the valuation is done. and then basically agree on how that valuation was done. And then we can start talking about the actual value that we want to assign to them. But that's in my court to get around to the group and to share with everybody. So there really isn't an update other than I need to do that. Dan, do you have anything to add?
I can, just for general guidance. Y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
So that was an exactly correct statement of where we are. The thing to be thinking about is that the posture is that the fair market value proposal is that it be based on comparables using the per square foot amount that tenants pay that's devoted to taxes. And so we have some figures that the developer has proposed. According to those figures, the difference between what the average tenant in DeKalb pays and what would be paid using the $67 million valuation is a difference of about $3 a square foot. So there's nothing wrong with the comparables approach. We don't have any independent validation of the numbers that we're being given, but accepting them at face value, then we're either going to have to use something like an average or pick what we think is the most comparable or ask for something that we think is more comparable. But that's where we are, and it shouldn't really be that much longer before we get this resolved.
Thank you. Next up, tables and chairs renovation.
Yeah, this is just an update since we had worked, Dan's team worked really hard on the abatement lease agreement. There's some difficulty with this property because we didn't have a current lease with them, so it was figuring out those details as well. And we gave them an abatement for the months of, I believe it was May and June. And I've been talking with the tenant, the owner of Tables and Chairs. He's a wonderful guy. He's been in that building for 37 years. He's very concerned because obviously his business is totally dependent on events. It was his biggest money makers are graduations, which of course didn't happen this year. And so he's actually asking for further abatement. I asked him to write up a proposal. I think I talked to him yesterday. So he said he was going to work on that, but I'd really like if the board would, my ask is that the board give the chair permission to continue negotiations with him and with Dan's help.
I'm okay with that.
Motion to give the chair authority to continue those discussions.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, but is that's just the tables and chairs business, not the,
The other tenant, Catherine?
Yeah, so the other tenant, the Antiques, is the subtenant. So my guess is that he's asking for it too, and that's what's also putting some pressure on Tables and Chairs. But we don't deal with Bigger's Antiques directly since he's a subtenant.
so
Were you asking?
he didn't get Bob Boyles to buy everything that he has? I know he wants to.
I don't think so.
You weren't asking about the collision site though, correct? Just tables and chairs? Okay.
Just the tables and chairs.
Anything else on tables and chairs? Moving on to the grant or loan program discussion. We continue to kick this around. Just generally, I think we all like the idea of doing something. We just need to figure out what that something is, if we can actually do it. Catherine, is there anything else you wanted to bring up or?
Yeah, I kind of made it more complicated because I asked Andy, if, as a business owner, if, these $1,000 or $2,000 grants are worth it, given the application process, and would that really help, especially because we're specifying it to be COVID, PPE related. And then Andy had the awesome idea of, what if we could use that money to buy the PPE and then give it to our businesses. And I was like, yeah, that's great. And then I remembered, then I had Dan's voice in my head telling me what was allowed by DDAs. So I've kind of pushed it on Dan. He was looking further into about what we can actually do as a DDA and, what would be legal.
Is that my cue?
Yes, thanks.
I looked again today at the initial grant document, which is short and sweet, which is good. There's really only 3 things that are legal issues, and the primary one is this, that health, safety, and welfare is a function of a unit of general government like a city or a county. It's not a DDA function. By importing powers, we have the power to promote industry, trade, and agriculture, and maybe expend funds to do that. So we could, for example, expend funds for a $1,000 grant and tie that to the purchase of PPE if we wanted to. But we'd have to have some give back in the form of a commitment to do something that promoted trade, industry, and agriculture. And some examples are to promote downtown, to host prospect meetings, to join in press releases, purchase goods and services at some percentage of the amount purchased downtown before, maintain employment at some percentage of the employment level before. It can be a checklist, but in order to go about doing this right, particularly since it's grant not a loan, we need something like that. And for $1,000, we don't want to make the hurdle too high, but it's got to be something. So input from the board on what you consider to be appropriate commitment to promoting industry, trade, and agriculture, knowing that the real goal is to do something about the pandemic would be helpful. The other 2 things are kind of minor, kind of bureaucratic, but if somebody's committing to us that they're going to do something, we need a closeout report where they come back and say, yeah, I did it, or I didn't. And if they didn't, then they need to pay the grant back or some portion of it. And we need some sort of audit right in case anybody ever audits us and says, well, you spent this money to get certain things done, did you do it properly? And that may require us to go back to the grantee. None of this has to be very elaborate. I'm doing some programs that are fairly elaborate, but given the scope of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to do, be very commendable, I think. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. The main thing is, what is it that we feel good about asking these businesses to commit to give back to us? Any questions? Thank you.
So I think the action item on that is we need to discuss what it is we think is appropriate to do. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Because like they all said, our folks are really going to come in for $1,000. Is that enough to get people excited about doing something and actually using the money? Does anyone have anything to add to that? Catherine, anything else?
No, I would just be interested to hear anything from the board, what you guys think, or even Andy, if we can't be the ones to buy it, is $1,000 if you're going through this process where, we have to have the checks and balances and reports. So doing some paperwork from the business side, whether or not that's worth it. I mean, I know it doesn't make or break it since it's such a small amount, but is it at this point any little bit helps or?
Definitely, I think it would definitely help. But again, I think as I pointed out, it's like how, I guess we're not trying to help. We're trying to help as many businesses as we can, but then what can we do? So that's my thoughts.
I wonder if there's something that we can do with that money that would help businesses such as restaurants to have outdoor dining. This is kind of a specific situation, but let's take Himalayas, for example. They have outdoor dining, but it's so darn hot out there because they don't have overhead shading. What if they could use that money for overhead shading or something like that? I think that would be, and other restaurants, at least restaurants, could use the same thing. So that, even you, Andy, could use that out on your patio. So maybe that would be a better way to use it.
I actually think that's a great idea. We're in the process of installing posts and then a sail shade canopy. So yes, it gets very hot. No, I think that's a great idea, Messi.
Basically taking the kind of facade program and morphing it into outdoor patio spacing.
Yeah,
Right, and it's the same concept.
yeah.
It's a good idea.
And those sail canopies, they're very reasonable. They don't cost,
Yeah.
a lot, so.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And the hop sticks patio is fantastic as it is, but improvement would be.
Thank you.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Anything else? Moving on. New business, the post office site.
Yeah, I put this on there. It's still, I don't even, it might feel a little too early to talk about it. The reason why I put it on there is a couple months ago, I had a development team approach me, and they were interested in a couple properties around Chamblee, and then we started talking about kind of ideas we had for both the International Village site and where we'd like the post office to move. I even got Don on the phone with them to just kind of walk them through where we are in the process with the post office relocation. They know we're at the very early stages, and of course, they got very excited with the concept or the idea of what they could do if they could help with the relocation of the post office, what they could do with the current post office site. And even though I told them it's really early on, they just wanted to know if the board had any idea with that current post office site, what you all wanted to do as far as finding a developer for that. Would that be an RFP process? Has there been any thought given to it? So I just told them that I would put the question out to the board, telling them too that, this is very early on. The post office deal is obviously going to take a long time, and we're still waiting about the airport master plan to see if the REZ zone is going to be lowered so we can use some of the county land to put the post office in. So they know it's very high level and kind of like a superficial discussion, but I just wanted to bring it up now.
I would think that another possibility for the location of the post office, and also, by the way, the griller, whatever it's called, recall building, both of those sites, the site that we've looked at for the post office behind the kennel, the dog pound or whatever you call it, and as well the International Village site, both of those are conducive to relocating a post office to, as well as the recall building, or the griller guy in the first place. So, that seems to me a great use of that area because of the fact of its close proximity to the airport and the noise protection zone and the runway protection zone. So, I would be all for that.
The question, do we want to engage these folks to kind of further the process with us?
Yeah, so here's my thoughts on the whole thing. Last year, we were given specific instructions to liquidate all our properties. The city needed us to sell everything. And I raised the question of why are we moving forward, why are we continuing to move forward with negotiations with the post office? And the response I got was, well, we can still move forward because we would just cut a deal with a developer and we wouldn't necessarily have to be the actual purchaser of that property. So I think we've already got money invested in the negotiations. Don, I guess, can give us a recap later. But, I think we absolutely have to start talking about what we want there, who we're going to partner with, because we don't have the ability to buy that, and the post office is going to finally say, yeah, let's move forward, and we're not going to have a way to do it. Because it's my understanding from the emails I've been getting that we can forget about, more intergovernmental agreement money.
To me, it feels a little bit premature to be considering that. We have no idea what the timetable is for the post office, if we could even have it. And we have no idea, getting into partnership with a development entity for a project that could take several years to get out. I mean, it seems like there's very little way to actually write an enforceable agreement that goes on that far into the future for a real estate deal. So from my standpoint, I would prefer to wait until we get things a little bit further and then take it to a more of a public RFP process. I'm not as concerned about exactly what goes on that site. I think that's the purview of the city to determine what's appropriate. And there is a master plan that does say what should go on that site. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we need to continue to pursue the post office site in the sense that we want something else there. I don't necessarily think that means that we need to be the ones that purchase it. But when we get to that point, I think we lean on our developers to kind of figure that process out.
So I think then we have to give Don specific marching orders, because he's been working on this for over a year now, taking them around, showing them alternative sites, having meetings with them. You know, there's no reason for him to waste his time if we're not ready to start having conversations about moving forward with that.
But I think we'd be happy to move forward, but until Don and the post office and whatever entity where we're able to make a deal to put them that's acceptable to the post office. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that have to be figured out even before we can consider the deal itself with the post office. I mean, so, you know, I don't want to waste Don's time either, but
Yeah, the goal hasn't changed. I mean, we're doing something with that site. So it doesn't make sense to pull back now and just leave it be and let the market figure it out. You know, I think we want to dictate the process as much as we can, and when we get to that point, you know, worst case scenario is the city says you can't buy it. Okay. But at least we can have something under control and, you know, figure out who wants to develop it at that point.
Okay, that's helpful. Is there anybody else?
So, yeah, I think the long and short of it is, I think it's premature to be speaking to individual groups, but as far as Don's concerned, I think we just continue as is.
I agree. I just have a very quick update with Pruitt. I have reached out to Chris to see if he could come today to give an update, because, you know, we haven't hashed out the deals of the MOU abatement yet. And we've sent them the summary of the MOU that Dan put together, and we haven't gotten comments back, so that's why I reached out to him. He said they are currently working on a workforce study that they hired Accenture to do. That should be completed in the next 3 weeks. Once that's done, they'll have a better idea of what they're doing moving forward, and then they'll come before the DDA once they figure that out. So I just want to give that update.
And
So,
go ahead.
So we don't currently have a signed MOU.
That's correct.
We've actually submitted, we drafted and submitted an MOU, but we haven't made any progress.
But just to clarify, as far as the abatement that's been approved, I mean, Pruitt is approved for a project by the city to build, is that right?
That's correct.
And the abatement is based on that project,
Yes.
and they're thinking that might change.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have some organizational issues just with COVID and the increased operational costs that they have. I think that's why they're taking a second look at everything. But obviously, if they want that abatement to change, they'd have to go back through the whole process on our side, as long as they're not changing the design of the building.
Okay, good luck.
I'm sorry, one more question for Dan. Dan, the MOU you sent to them, did it have a timeline on when they need this? I mean, do we have anything in place that says they have to sign it by a certain period?
I always put an expiration date, this document has to be signed by such and such a date, there you are, and the closing has to occur by such and such a day. I haven't checked, but we're probably past the time that's stated in the draft, but it's just a draft. So they're not in default. It's not like they lose an agreement because they don't have an agreement right now. As we said, we've approved it, but that's based on entering into an MOU, and that's not been done.
Thank you.
Anything else? Public comment? Anyone from the public want to come on?
Hi, I'm Maria Hetzel from 5200 Peachtree, Malone's. I was just wondering about the post office. I mean, it's not a beautiful building, but it kind of makes sense to have a post office right in the city center. So why would we move it too far away? So I was just kind of curious. More of a question than a comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Motion to go into executive session pursuant to OCGA 50-14 3B1 for the purpose of discussing or approving a real estate transaction.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Do we have a motion?
Yes, I motion that we authorize the chair to negotiate a parking lease on the Vintage Pizza property.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.